Hi, this is Holly Silva with Business Strategies Podcast for professionals and small business owners who want to launch the business of their dreams. I hired Adam because I decided to do a complete rebrand and refocus of my podcast, and I wanted practical guidance from someone who had been there, done that, so to speak, and who could help me to monetize if possible along the way to having the listenership stats that significant brand sponsors are looking for. Not only does Adam provide fantastic practical guidance on rebranding and SEO, so that my podcast is discoverable by my ideal audience. But as I need it, he also provides that guidance step by step so as to not overwhelm me with the process. And he helped me to not only craft my offers, but also guided me on when and how often to release those offers, which makes all the difference. So I am immensely grateful for Adam and the Podcast Business School.
Listen up, Pod Pals. This is important. The name of your podcast will either be the number one reason why your ideal listeners find you or the number one reason why they cannot find you. If you're ready to leverage the awesome power of organic discoverability and make it easy for your ideal listeners to find your show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, then it's time to rebrand and relaunch your podcast with my brand new Podcast Reboot course. This online course provides my simple step-by-step system to help you rename, rebrand, and relaunch your podcast so that your ideal listeners start finding you week after week. Through December 1st, 2024, you can use the code POD, P-O-D, to save $100 and bring the course price down to just $197. And you're going to get access to my 3 bonus live trainings where I'm going to help coach you through the process and answer your questions live. To get started, use the link in the show notes or head on over to www.podcastingbusiness.school/reboot and use the code POD, P-O-D, by December 1st, 2024 to save $100 and get the bonus live trainings. What's up, Pod Pals? It's your buddy Adam. You are listening to Podcasting Business School. It's a show where I teach podcasters how to love your podcast like a hobby and build it like a business. If you're an online coach, consultant, or a service provider that's looking to learn how to leverage your podcast to grow your online business and get more clients, you're in the right spot. Today, I'm jamming out with a few of my Pod Pals here, the November 2024 Pod Pals Zoom party. We're talking about 2 big branding mistakes that are killing your podcast download numbers. I've been holding this one back because we're focused on branding a little bit these last couple of weeks. But one I talk about a lot. The other one I've never, ever talked about. And I've had it in my back pocket. I've had so many of like my podcast growth coaches. They're like, Adam, please talk about this. Please talk about this. All my clients are making this mistake. Please talk about this. That way I guess it's causing a lot of arguments from my people that are out there coaching in the podcasting space. They're like, we'd love to just be able to refer our clients to this episode where you talk about this thing that I'm going to be getting to in a minute. But I'm going to talk about the one I've talked about before first. So 2 big podcast branding mistakes. The first one has to do with your podcast art. I see a lot of people like, I am the brand. I am the star of the show. I am the brand. So what they naturally think with their podcast art, huge picture of themselves on the podcast art. All right. And I understand where you're coming from. I totally understand where you're coming from. But when it comes to discoverability of your show, it's a 2-part relay race. So I talk all the time on my show about organic discoverability with keywords in the name of your show. So let's say somebody searches podcasting tips. My show is probably going to be the first one that pulls up because I understand how the rules are. But what if on my art, it's just a giant Adam face picture and there's little tiny words around it that says Podcasting Business School in creative cursive script font that nobody can read? That's a problem. Where if someone else has a really properly branded podcast image that features the text first, and I could put my face on my art if I wanted to, but my rule is the text is the star of the show. We're using big, thick, chunky text that's easy to read on a phone because that's what happens. Somebody searches podcasting tips looking for a show like mine. Then I'm on the screen with 10, 15, 20 other shows, and it's all small. We all get cocky on Canva. We're on Canva and we're like, this looks great. I can read it so easily on my giant computer screen. But imagine it on a phone, tiny square with lots of other images. Are you going to draw eyeballs or not with a giant face picture? Now, if you're a famous comedian, when Will Ferrell launched the Ron Burgundy podcast, it debuted at number 1, just giant Ron Burgundy face picture. That was the only thing on the art. and debuted at number one. If you're not famous, if you're not a famous actor, if you're not in movies, if no one recognizes your face on a billboard, you can still have your face on the art, but it's a huge mistake if it dominates your podcast logo. And I'm talking about your logo, not individual episode art. So let the text be the star of the show naturally. And then there'll be like a little square at the bottom, a little corner. Let's put your face there. And if you follow this rule, it will help you so much to win that finger hover battle. Somebody searches podcasting tips, their finger is hovering. Which one do I choose first? Giant face picture or the one that says podcasting business school, giant and easy to read? That one's probably going to win. And, I don't think anybody has ever gone like, remember back when I was looking for a podcast to listen to about podcasting tips 4 weeks ago? What was that third one that I didn't like? I'm going to go back and listen to that one. Like that doesn't happen. The finger is hovering. You have to win the battle or you've lost it probably forever. So, this little branding tip will help tremendously. I know some of your public speakers, your authors, you're trying to get you as the personal brand out there. Just don't let the you-ness dominate your podcast art, because if they can't read it, if they don't know what it's about, if they don't see some of the keywords that they're searching on that podcast logo, you're probably going to miss out on that finger hover battle. I want you to win that one. So that's the first branding mistake that I'm seeing. The second one, this is huge. This is one that all of my certified podcast growth coaches have asked me to bring to the surface. And a lot of people are making this mistake. I did my very first show. So I made a note to say this very succinctly. Your podcast name, the name of your show, probably should not be the same as your brand, the title of your book, the title of your course, your website URL, or your social media handle. All right, I'll say it again. The name of your podcast probably should not be the same as your brand, your book, your course, your website, or your social media handle, because none of those things are optimized with keywords to optimize for organic discoverability for your podcast. So, example, I launched in the health space in 2015. I started as a podcaster in the health space and made this mistake. I was like, my website is www.transformationcoach.me. Let's have the transformationcoach.me podcast. Terrible name. Nobody was searching all those, especially since I smushed it all together. If I put them as separate words, maybe, but still not that great. But they were all smushed together. Transformationcoach.me podcast. Nobody found it. When I switched it to the Million Pound Mission Weight Loss podcast, all right, now we know what it's about, who it's for, got some keywords in there. We're good to go. So I see this all the time. People are like, well, I've got this giant Instagram handle at blah, blah, blah. And like, they think it's going to carry over, but nobody is searching for your Instagram handle on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. All right. You've got a book called, Delivering Awesomeness, the blah, blah, blah story. Nobody is searching Delivering Awesomeness on Apple or Spotify. You've got a course, whatever it is. If it doesn't follow my 3 naming rules, the perfect podcast name formula, then it shouldn't be the name of your podcast. You are doing yourself and your brand a disservice, because if your goal is to grow your brand, maybe you're an author and you want to sell more books, don't name your podcast the same name as your book if it doesn't follow my 3-step rules. When I read the name, I want to know exactly what the show's about. I want to know exactly who it's for. I need at least 2 keywords. If it doesn't follow those 3 things, then don't use it. Some people just feel so locked in. But it's the same everywhere. I hear that all the time. It's my book name. It's my IG handle name. It's my course name. Branding. Branding doesn't mean a darn thing if nobody is searching any of that. And you're wasting your time as a podcaster if nobody can find your show because you're locked in on everything being the same. Okay. So this is really, really important. Again, all my coaches that I've been certifying my program, they're like, this just keeps happening. I'm having this Instagram handle fight every single week where they're like, it has to be the same name because of branding. And again, if whatever you're wanting to name it because of branding doesn't fit that 3-step rule, it's not going to help. It's going to be really, really hard for people to find your show organically. Now, if you've got a giant team and you got a giant marketing budget and you can pour into that, then that's fine. You can do that. You can grow your show that way. But if you want any free organic discoverability to happen while you sleep, then you got to follow my 3-step process. So um, let's let's dive in. I'm going to open. Those are my 2 things. I see I got one question in the chat from Shay. We're gonna open it up, and I'm gonna have you all just ask straight away, and we'll get some Q&A going on this topic. So Shay, if you want to, you can go ahead and unmute yourself and fire away with that question.
Yeah. Hey, hi guys. So my podcast is strictly entertainment. I'm a Pacific Northwest history and humor podcast. I'm not trying to convert leads or drive any traffic to sell anything other than just show related merchandise, maybe. So I'm wondering how much this applies to my sort of podcast.
Well,
yeah,
I get exactly what you're saying. It applies. I mean, it's going to apply with just growth across the board, no matter what type of podcast that you have. So, so your show is Rainy Day Rabbit Holes, right?
Yep.
Okay. Now, I like that subtitle, Pacific Northwest History, and humor? Is that what it is?
Yeah. Sorry that it got cut off on the
yeah. So,
picture.
Is that included on your title line somewhere, like listed where you okay, then you're good. Because those are the keywords. That's what it's about. Those are the topics that people could be searching: Pacific Northwest history, like the word humor, like those are some words that are searchable. So that's going to help for sure. So if you're like IG is Rainy Day Rabbit Holes, or if you got a book named Rainy Day Rabbit Holes, okay, but what you did there with that title extension, that's the trick that we need to implement and go, okay, here's this extra little thing that makes it all fit together. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah. My title of my podcast online on all the platforms is Rainy Day Rabbit Holes, Pacific Northwest history and humor. So it's all in there, but all of my, my website, all of my social media, all of that is Rainy Day Rabbit Holes or Rainy Day Rabbit Holes pod already. So it is all fairly the same everywhere, but we always shoehorn in Pacific Northwest history somewhere.
Yeah. And that's the trick is like, I feel like people just need to look at each individual platform and go, is this name aligned with my brand, which that's important, but also like, is it optimized for each platform, for Instagram, for a blog, for your course or whatever it is that you're creating? I understand brand alignment, but you did a smart thing. You're like, okay, on Apple and Spotify, we need to make sure we have this extension on there because these are things that people that maybe ideal listeners could be searching on those platforms. That was a really smart move. And that's what I'm trying to encourage people to do is go, okay, don't just boom, it's got to be Rainy Day Rabbit Holes, period, end of story everywhere. You're going to miss out. But having that extra subtitle on there, that's the move we're looking for. So well done there. Now, let me give you a bonus tip, an experiment that you may or may not decide to try. I had a client, I've mentioned this a couple of times on the show, but I had a client that did this and she just crushed it. Lori, shout out to Lori Ann. We were doing a Download Growth Club meeting. I was kind of describing this, like, hey, anybody want to try this? I'm thinking about trying it. And so all you do is flip flop in your, like I host in Libsyn. So I'd go in Libsyn and just flip flop the subtitle and the title, but just keep all the branding and everything else the same, just so that for you, it'd be Pacific Northwest history would be the first words, because the first words or the first 2 words of your podcast name carry the most discoverability and SEO and searchability weight. So I had Lori Ann do this, and she's got a show called Be in Demand, public speaking tips for blah, blah, blah. So we switched it. So it's a public speaking tips for blah, 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 Be on Demand. She hit a 7-day personal best in her show growth by 200% in the next 7 days after switching. All she did was just flip, and none of the other branding changed. Her art didn't change. The way she describes her show, title-wise, doesn't change. She just did a little experiment for 7 days and switched them, and growth went through the roof. And it's maintaining. It's really taken off. So something to think about just in case you wanted to do a little podcasting experiment. Sound cool?
Yeah, that's a great idea. So I would just lead Pacific Northwest history and swap. Okay, I'm going to give it a try. Why not? Yeah. What am I going to lose?
Yeah, you just switch positions. And like I said, when you introduce your show, Rainy Day Rabbit Holes, like you don't change it at all anywhere else. It's just the positions as it's listed in like Libsyn or Buzzsprout or wherever you host your show, and see what happens. Let me know. If you get some good results, let me know and I'll talk about it on the show. All right.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Cool. All right. Brandon, Megan, Rachel, any thoughts, questions for you all as far as the branding that we talked about today with, does my podcast art fit this, or am I making the branding mistake? Rachel, go ahead and go for it.
Well, so we're not using our pictures at all.
That's
So
fine.
it's a podcast for women by women, and it's just two women with a microphone drawing wise. So we're not trying for that. It's not about us. So we purposely shied away from that.
Yeah. I have a giant face, so it's like, it's too much real estate. I mean, look how like my face just on the Zoom screen is giant, covering up half of the thing. Like, it's just like, can you imagine that in a podcast art? That just doesn't work. But no, like I feel like a lot of times people start with how do I add some pizzazz to this first? And I just kind of like to go, what are the really important words? Let's make those as big as possible. And then there's some natural nooks and crevices in there. That's like, oh, there's a little, circular shape on the right corner. We can put a microphone there. We could put my face there if I wanted to. We could put a heart there or something that's relative to the brand. But I think that's just the real key pro tip we're trying to go for here. Is like, let's let the text and the font be super readable, as big as we possibly can, maximize that real estate, and then dress it up around that. So I think that's a smart move to go with there, Rachel. So good job. Well done. Well done. Yeah, Brandon, go for it.
Yeah, I was just wondering, does this relate only to the naming convention of the podcast, or you're talking like the overall name when you're, presenting, like say on Apple, how you name your podcasts in general? Like, or are you talking about specifically each episode
I'm talking about
of your podcast?
Yeah, great question. I'm talking about the name of the podcast. Like my show is called Podcasting Business School. The logo, the name, each individual episode, that's a different story. But yeah, I think that and we still want to leverage keywords and be, use attractive terminology to let people know what it's about, who it's for. But yeah, this is specifically branding mistakes that are happening with the name of the podcast. Yeah, great clarification question there. So cool. Megan, you want to chime in on this?
I just have a question. How big of a deal is it to like really change your podcast name after whatever 200 episodes?
Well, great question. First of all, I would like to state that this is a very normal process, like a very normal part of the process. I mean, I feel like so many podcasters that are in that 50 to 100 episode zone, especially, have changed their show name at least once, or they probably should. They probably should have. It probably would have been a good idea to do that at some point.
Yeah.
Like it's very common. I feel like a lot of people get into podcasting and they're like, I birthed this baby. I got to see it through to the end. And they see it as a fail. Like if they have to pivot, it's seen as a fail. But 99.9% of podcasters get into podcasting having really no idea, or at least no experience personally. Like they've taken a course, they've listened to podcast. They're like, all right, I'm just, ready, fire, aiming this thing, and let's get it out there, which is how it should be. Quit podcrastinating, get your show out there, and we're good to go. And you figure it out along the way. But along that way, you're like, ooh, I thought I would like to talk about this, but actually I want to talk about that. Or, ooh, I thought this type of person was going to show up, but a different type of person showed up, or a different type of person is buying things from me or wants to buy things from me. That's when you're like, I need to pivot, because that's what I saw with my show. I was like, wow, these people are coming to me naturally, organically, wanting to buy a certain type of coaching from me. What if I pivoted the whole brand in that direction? Like when I first launched this show, it was called Casting the Pod. I'm still embarrassed about that, and I hate bringing it up because it's terrible. It's just terrible. People thought it was a fishing show, Casting the Pod, a podcast about podcasting called Casting the Pod. Inside joke. Nobody got the joke. Nobody listened. But I still had people come to me and go, could you do consulting on my show with I know you're getting clients from your show. Could you teach me how to do that? Or can you help me create my membership? Or can you help me create a lead magnet? I'm like, I'm doing business school for podcasters over here. So that's I pivoted at episode It took me 100 episodes, y'all, to figure this out. At episode 101, I finally pivoted and rebranded. And honestly, I wouldn't be here if I didn't do that, because nobody would be listening to my show. And now we're approaching 600,000 downloads. Like, this is like, that's a huge freaking difference from 6 downloads to episode to crossing 600,000 downloads. Big difference. And it's same pretty much content. I'm a little bit better as I go, but just the naming, the branding, the keywords, it's just a huge, huge deal. So it's a normal part of the process, and it's not hard to do. As far as like,
I always like want to mention, like, I always want to tread lightly with my clients, because I feel like people are so attached to their podcast, and they'll feel like I'm like punching them in the fucking throat if I'm like, hey, what if? But I work with a lot of podcasters. Obviously, I do advertising for podcasts. So for the people that don't know me on here, I do advertising for podcasters, like on Facebook and Instagram. To all my clients, they're business owners. So their podcast is functioning as a client acquisition tool. And like so many times, I'm like, you should probably change the name of this podcast. But I'm like trying to tread lightly, because I don't have a weekly podcast. Like, I have a private podcast, so I don't like know, all the things that kind of go into everything. So I try to tread lightly with it, because people are really attached to it. But like, I do a lot of strategy, like I do way more than ads most of the time. And sometimes I just want to be like, maybe if you just change this a little bit and added some keywords, you get some organic discoverability along with what we're doing.
Yeah.
So I didn't know if there was any like negative effect, or like if it's actually that big of a deal to change it after X amount of episodes, or if it's literally like doesn't matter.
It's a very common thing. Yeah, it's a very, very common thing. I just want podcasters to see it as a natural part of the process and a smart move, and not a epic fail. Like, I make fun of myself just to kind of like get everybody else over. Like, quit beating yourself up about it. My show was named terrible. I mean, hell, I started with the Transformation Coaches at Me podcast. Awesome. Like, I had no idea what I was doing. And then we rebranded to Million Pound Mission Weight Loss. Then we niched down into low carb weight loss, and like the whole thing. And it worked every single time. I've got friends that rebrand their show every year. They change the topic and they on purpose. And I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but they do it. And it's not hard to do as far as just like swapping things out. You want to be strategic about it. And, Megan, my pop pal, queued me up really nicely on this one. She didn't even know. I appreciate you. But for those of you that have been, listening the last couple of weeks, that's why I created my reboot program, my podcast reboot program. It's on sale. Get the link in the show notes. Use the promo code POD, POD, save $100. It's only $197. Okay, here's the deal. If you guys are like, okay, Adam, you've been talking about this for 2 weeks. I need to rebrand my show, relaunch it, rename it, the whole thing. You can pay me $3,000 to $5,000 for one-on-one consulting, or you can use the code POD, the link in the show notes, and pay $197 and get the course. And I've got some free, some added, not free, but bonus small group coaching sessions that we're doing in December, where you can work on your art, bring it, and I can vet it for you. All right. So link in the show notes. Megan, thanks for setting me up without even knowing. Your check's in the mail and your affiliate commission. But no, that's we're coming up on the back edge. December 1st is the last day to use the code POD, POD, and save $100 on the podcast reboot. All right. Great discussion so far. I want to do some podcasts for speed dating. And you guys all know what happens at Pod Pals. Every month we come in here, we teach a little bit, we talk a little bit, and then everybody gets to grab the mic and tell us about your show, who should be listening to your show. If you have guests, what type of guests you're looking for. If you want to be a guest on someone else's podcast, what you want to speak about on someone else's podcast. And most importantly, make sure you let us know how to contact you so that somebody could reach out that's listening to this episode and get you booked on their podcast. So, Megan, you've been here before. I want you to go ahead and kick us off. Podcast or speed dating. Everybody gets 60 seconds, not 60 minutes. Let's go.
Perfect. So, hi, everybody. I'm Megan Shields. I'm the CEO of Chime House Media. Like I mentioned before, I don't have a weekly podcast. I currently have a private podcast so that I can leverage the power of audio without the commitment. Love that. And so, so I do Facebook and Instagram advertising for podcasters. I love to be a guest on shows. Typically, the shows that I love to be a guest on have clients that are podcasters or business owners with podcasts, because all of my clients are either coaches, course creators, service providers, people selling digital products and programs where their podcast is part of their content marketing strategy in their business. So yeah, that's me. I think I'm less than 60 seconds. So boom.
All right. And if you all want to listen to Megan's episode of my show on Podcasting Business School, check out episode 387 of Podcasting Business
Oh,
School. We talked
yes.
about all things Instagram and Facebook ads. And we talked about the little experiment they did with me. And that's why we all got connected. I put a little challenge out there for them. So check out episode 387. All right. Let's meet some new pod pals here. Brandon, why don't you go ahead and take the mic? Tell us about your show.
Hey, how's it going? Brandon Dunheath, my name. I actually have two podcasts. One I'm launching soon, the Don Don Review. That's why I'm here actually, is because I wanted to learn kind of about it. I don't know. It's not very genre defined yet. Right now, I'm just reviewing my experiences with certain things. I'm trying to kind of find my lane in it. It's short form content right now. I also have a podcast that I started in 2022 about crypto, and then we rebranded to just tech, kind of overall balloon, and our following kind of went down because we opened up the genre, I guess.
Yeah.
Because people were listening for crypto specifically, but it looked like crypto was dying. And then so we were like, well, let's talk about other stuff because we're interested in other stuff. And then started a weekly sort of news recap, and then kind of getting back going with the crypto stuff because it's going
Makes
up right
sense.
now. So yeah.
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
I want to tune into that. I'm one of the best moves I ever made was I bought a bunch of Bitcoin and Ethereum 4 years ago, and I never did anything with it. But it's doing pretty darn well right
Yeah.
now. I keep looking at it, and I'm like texting my dad, going, "See, I told you."
Yeah.
I just bought it and shut up about it about 4 years ago. So
That's
so
a good, yeah.
But-
So my partner and I, we started a mining company, and in order to put face to the name, or face to like crypto, because crypto seems very, faceless, we decided to start a podcast, and then that led into in a podcast studio that we own right now
very
in
cool.
Century City. So
Very cool. All
yeah.
right. Well, great to have
Yeah.
you here on Pod Pals, Brandon. Welcome.
Hey,
Welcome.
thank you.
All right. Let's keep it going here. Rachel, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm Rachel Turkis. So my podcast is tentatively called She's a Bit Much, which is a podcast for a Dear Abby for career women who have to deal with a lot of things in their day to day, and they cannot really go to HR or other women in their organization for a variety of reasons and need some advice. So myself and my best friend, she's an HR expert. I'm a female leader in tech. And we will either answer the questions ourselves as they come in, or we will have a panel of women that will come and help answer those questions. I am the CEO of a nonprofit called Cloud Girls, which specializes in mentoring and helping women in tech become leaders. And and the first 12 episodes are entitled Things I Tell My Younger Self. And we have a panel of women come on every time, talk about specific things that are happened to them in their careers, what they did, what they wish they did, which is not always a great idea, and then what they should do. So just to help women along the way.
Awesome. All right. Great to have you, Rachel. Welcome to Pod Pals. And Shay, go ahead and tell us about your show.
Okay, this is me with having done nothing. I took off my bathrobe. Hey guys, I'm Shay from Rainy Day Rabbit Holes. We showcase and highlight the lesser known stories from Pacific Northwest history. And we do that with a lot of humor because we're usually drinking a giant bottle of champagne while we do it. The type of guests we have are local people, either in the history world. So we've had lots of different historians, people who lead history tours. And then we also hang out a lot with our pod pals. So Jody and I actually just started a new project. We just launched this month. It's called the Umbrella Podcast Collective. And it is a collaborative community of podcasters that come together just to help each other out, help each other promote, and lift each other up. And so that is going to be my focus, because the long-term goals for this community, which is completely free, is to someday pivot into a podcast network. And this is a good way to learn how to do that with low entry, right? So my podcast is a lot of fun. I don't ever expect to get rich off of it. So it'll be a passion project. But I want to learn how to actually do the podcasting business because the network will need that. And I've loved podcasting. I've been doing it for a year. And like any other podcaster, I really would love to start 5 more when I have a moment of free time. So yeah. And I love to have anybody who has any good stories in history. They don't even have to be about Pacific Northwest. I always find a way to connect the Pacific Northwest to the rest of the world. So if you want to come on and hang and chat, it'd be awesome. And you can find me at rainydayrabbitholes.com /umbrella if you want to learn about the collective. And you can reach out to me at Shea, SHEA, at rainydayrabbitholes.com.
All right. And I love the idea of you getting in that podcast network. I feel like at some point I want to have like a panel discussion. I feel like nobody that I know of has really just nailed it and done it in a really great way, like with the podcast network. And there's no clear definition of like what it is and what it isn't. And there's a lot of scumbags out there screwing podcasters over that are making them pay a whole bunch of money to be a part of a network. I've seen these contracts that some of my clients put in front of me. I'm like, do not do this. Do not sign this. Giving up their RSS feeds. And, I had somebody last week that's like, yeah, I'm part of this podcast network. And I'm like, well, what kind of numbers are you doing? Oh, I'm not allowed to access that, but they send me a spreadsheet. I'm like, guess who's getting lied to with their numbers? Right. Did you do it'll sound like a presidential debate. You did a million, billion, billion, bajillion, billion, million. Like that's what it's going to sound like when you get your freaking results every week. It's going to be like, they're just making things up as they go. This is not going to make sense. So I like the idea of good people, like grassrooting a podcast network and starting from the free area. I like that a lot. So
that's what we're doing. I do have somebody who I look to as an example, and that's Allison Gill from the MSW Media Network. So she started out with the Mueller She Wrote podcast and turned that into a podcast network that is very successful. She's a friend of she's my brother's best friend. She's been on our show and she does it really well. She keeps her podcasters independent. She pays her people really well. She treats them awesome. And so that's kind of my, the way I want to do mine, but it's going to be all entertainment based podcasts is the idea, but we're going to learn as we go the best way to do this. So the collective's the way to do it where we can make mistakes and it's not going to, affect our business because we don't have one yet.
Exactly. I love it. Keep me posted on that, Shay. I will. Excited to support you on that journey.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
All right. Pod Pals. I appreciate you being here. We're kind of wrapping up the 2024 year. As far as content wise on the show, we're going to do some kind of looking ahead episodes of what I'm going to be strategizing with my show as far as monetization and growth, online business building in 2025. Some new things I'm going to be kicking out there. I'm also going to do an end of year wins episode. Probably in the next week or so, I'll put out an email going, hey, use this SpeakPipe link and let me know your name, the name of your show, and your win of the year. Maybe fire a question away. I did this last year, and I had a whole bunch of people from all over the world send audio clips of their top podcasting win of the year. They fired a question out there. I answered it on the show, and it was a really cool episode. So I'm going to keep that tradition going. So if you're not on my email list, you can use the link in the show notes for this episode. Download my new listener resource guide. That's a great way to get on my email list. And that way you get plugged into my best content as well. All right. Pod Pals that are here, appreciate you being here. Pod Pals that are listening in, appreciate you listening in each and every single week. And with that, I'm going to send you out into the world wishing you health, happiness, and many downloads. We'll see you next time. My top tip for all podcasters is to make sure that the name of your show isn't the number one reason why your ideal listeners cannot find you. I know that many of you have been thinking about making a change and rebranding your show to leverage the awesome power of organic discoverability. So I created a simple new program to help you out. I call it the Podcast Reboot Program. This is my step-by-step course that I created to help you rename, rebrand, and relaunch your podcast. Through December 1st, 2024, you can use the code POD, P-O-D, to save $100 on the course and bring the price down to just $197. I've also set up 3 live bonus workshops for anyone that uses the code POD, P-O-D, by December 1st. This is a great chance to rebrand your show and get some live help from me so that you can optimize everything you're learning inside the course. Use the link in the show notes or head on over to www.podcastingbusiness.school/reboot and use the code POD, P-O-D, to save $100 and get access to the bonus live trainings by December 1st.